I was actually very terrified of becoming a mother. Reparenting specifically is that process of learning and unlearning, healing and reconciling.
How much of it is second nature and how much needs to be taught? Hello, welcome to the Busy Moms Get It Done podcast, where we encourage moms that want to follow their motherly instinct and their passions. I am your host, Esther Shittu, journalist and mom of three. This week's guest is Samantha Broxton. Samantha is a businesswoman, community builder, and coach. She's a working mom that is passionate about intentional parenting and self-reparenting. Thank you so much for joining the podcast, Samantha.
Thank you for having me.
I like to start the podcast by asking my guests about their childhood and get into the weeds of what you envision motherhood to be as a child. What was your perception of motherhood? Did you even think about being a mother? Was it like, I don't know what that is, and then you're like, maybe I'll think about it later on? What was it like for you?
I think motherhood was always a present thought. As the eldest daughter to an immigrant mother and a default caretaker a lot of the times for my siblings. And I think I was always processing motherhood through the ocular of my mother's journey and how I was experiencing her as a mother. I thought about it more as like a threat to my stability and to my mental health for the longest, because especially for for immigrant women, it can be like motherhood can derail you within the wrong circumstances. And the wrong circumstances is quite often the choice of partner, right? I think that there's a lot of better conversations, more formal conversations about the choice of partner happening now. But if you really think about it, that conversation was always implicit for girls of color, right? Like that journey, that experience. My mother always said it's just so hard to do it alone. She always said that, like constantly. And she always referenced other women's struggle, because a lot of struggles were collective, like they were shared. There were some that were deeply private, but there were some that were public in nature and difficult to keep private. But there was a level of empathy and compassion from the understanding that that woman's partner was causing even more struggle in a world filled with struggle. So like I think motherhood and partnership through motherhood was something that was always in the background. It always was the elephant in the room holding space in the conversation.
That's interesting. I feel like the conversation right now, especially in this day and age, is about choosing the right partner, right? Everyone is talking about, it's better for you to either not choose anyone or than to choose someone who's not going to make it work for you. What about you when you thought about your career path? Did you think about what that path would take shape or how it would look?
My parents really didn't. They discouraged a focus on romantic relationships at a young age, totally, because it is true, it has been true, and it still is true that romance in a traditional setting is often derailing for women historically, unless you get that almost unicorn partner. And I think that we have socialized women's male partners to feel a sense of insecurity at our own success and development outside of the home, right? So like for me, when I was younger, they definitely discouraged dating at an early age, especially because the truth is, and I do think it came from a place of fear and also a place that's often rooted in chauvinism, but I don't think it was necessarily, it was maybe wrong in action, but maybe, and even sometimes wrong in intention, but not necessarily the wrong thought process to raise your daughters with. Like you're getting in these modern feminist movements, the decentering of male attention as a goal, right? The issue is they tell us to decenter, and then a shift in fear, and they tell us to center, worry, prioritize. Like you're successful if you get good grades, you pick a great career, you get into a good school, but then that's not enough success, and you also need to get the right partner, right? And sometimes that can cause, they want to slow you down and then they want to rush you. And that is a chaos that is also very bad for women's mental health, right? At any age, but especially in your young adult years. And sometimes we make the worst decisions based on that, right? Give yourself space and grace to find the right partnership, if that is your path.
I agree with that. I think that I would argue, just to follow up on what you're saying, I would argue that a lot of people who are discentering men or arguing against centering men are not really arguing for people to rush themselves at the end of the stage. It's more like perhaps slow down as a young woman in your 20s. This is rushing so to like find the love of your life.
What happens is they want you to decenter romantic relationships in your teen years, even maybe your new adult years, especially if you're in school. But at some point, it pivots where they're concerned with childbearing age and finding a spouse and having children timely. Um, and some of the conversations that people are having with decentering men is, in a broader sense, maybe less Caribbean, less, you know, Nigerian in nature. Some of that has to do with like feminism fighting toxic patriarchy. But I often, as like a child of immigrants, look at things through a third culture, right? Um, and what it means, like you're essentially being taught by your parents young to not center boys, not center them. It's they are incentivizing you and often shaming you if you do care too greatly about the male gaze, right? While there is tons of pressure to also assimilate and bring prestige and show that your parents be a trophy of bragging rights for your parents, and that is its own problematic niche. But when I was thinking about my own journey, I didn't really have that pivot from, oh, don't worry about boys, to like, when are you going to get married, when you're having kids, because I met my husband freshman year of college, right? We had been in a pretty consistent, sometimes off again relationship. And also as the eldest daughter, um, all consistently focused, really driven, probably more driven than like my parents had hoped. I think in certain regards I had exceeded their own goals and expectations for me, because my goals and my um, expectations were really ones I set for myself, and I set them very high, right? And so like I could, but also as like a very cerebral overthinker, someone who really enjoyed my years of sociology classes, I think I've taken some time to think about the intersections and the juxtapositions of like my own journey and like the greater journey when we talk about becoming a mother within, very specifically, United States, North American culture.
What was I know you met your husband pretty young,
Mm-hmm.
but what was that journey like when you did become a mother? Was it something you planned for, or did it just like you got married and thrown right into it?
It was not something we had planned for. I was actually very terrified of becoming a mother at that point in my life because I had just started my career. Um, I found myself pregnant a year out of completing undergrad, and it was very rocky for our relationship because I was triggered so deeply. I found myself having a lot of um, just like heartbreak, difficulty, trauma, triggers. The very long story that came down to I was forced to deal with my own mother issues and really start to think about the kind of mother I wanted to be. And I did that through like the most emotionally dramatic fashion during my pregnancy with my oldest, who's also a girl, who's my daughter. And it was a season of like tears, heartache, hard conversations, and some reconciliation with my mother for some of my childhood hurts. That oldest daughter wound, that was probably like the first season of really addressing. And I was also really grateful because a lot of women came forth and mentored me and talked to me They talked to me about their joys and their hurts, their own journeys, and they poured into me. I remember so many teary-eyed conversations, so many really difficult conversations with women that I went to church with, that women that mentored me in undergrad, and I'm really grateful for it. I think it was hard and it was dramatic, but it set the tone. It was like a crash course, a boot camp to really emotionally prepare me to be a mother. Because I think had I not embarked on that difficult journey, my motherhood journey would have been really wrought. It would have been really difficult. And I think my daughter got a very healed and intentional version of myself when she was earthside because of that journey that I went through with her when I was pregnant.
I love that. I wonder, do you remember some of the things that they said that stuck with you? Because I think that looking back in my own motherhood journey, I've always wanted to be a mom since I was like
Hmm.
8 years old.
Hmm.
Um, but I didn't know what that meant until I
Yeah,
got into it. Because you see moms and you're like, oh, this is so cute. This is so pretty.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but I probably didn't really know the gravity of that till
Hmm.
probably second child in.
There were so many things. I think they prepared me for the complexity of mothering and within the context of relationship. They prepared me for these truly the strength and fortitude necessary to do it. I know, gosh, I feel like so much of it was absorbed into my marrow. And it wasn't just one conversation, it was a series of conversations, and it was the way in which they showed up for me. It enforced the idea of the importance of community and child rearing. It also enforced the idea that it also required a lot of um, growth. It required work on my part more than the like daily work of like keeping a human alive. Like there was an emotional psychological work. These women were really candid about their struggles, their triumphs, their losses, their hurts, and their pain. And it wove a tapestry of motherhood for me that um really like surrounded me. It was a place of comfort because I think it was candid and it was real, right? Um it's because you have to understand this is like pre TikTok, women being candid online, you feeling like, oh, there's my people. These were like phone calls. These were like dinners and lunches. These were like deeply personal things that people weren't getting anywhere unless you read a memoir of a specific person, or your mother had the hard conversations with you. No one There was no trending topic for me to learn from. These were like real stories and real women. They blessed me with their truths. And that's what has always stayed with me.
I love that. I think that a lot of us lack the community, so
Yeah.
that was interesting.
And the
Um,
interesting part is that I found that community because I was really vulnerable. Like I told people I was struggling, and people it the my story spread amongst our community of women through the church, and they like I sounded the alarm, and they showed up. So it took a sense of mutual vulnerability, um, and like being very open with like how broken and afraid and distraught I was, and that it created a mutually safe space.
so I want to get a little bit into your coaching business. How did you, I guess, get into intentional parenting?
Hmm.
Obviously, it was something that you sought out with your own children, but how
Hmm.
did you realize that that's something that you wanted to help others with as well?
I realized to a certain extent with my with the way I talk to women in my everyday life, the conversations I would get into when people find out things I was passionate about as I was moving through the world, um, and some of the experiences like seeing when my husband was a pastor, the way he was a very interpersonal community based pastor on staff, and he would set up all of these coffee dates and lunches. He would sit down, he would invite people and sit on her couch, and we would have dinner, and then would have like a really therapeutic session of discussion where there was vulnerability, and then people wanted to talk to you and they wanted to be poured into, right? And so like we had cultivated years of this cornerstone experience in our interpersonal community and friendship circle. And to a certain extent, I was getting constant DMs where people wanted to talk specifically about their situation. Like, oh, I really learned a lot from this video. And then they would like get really vulnerable with me in their DMs. And my husband always say, "Gosh, I hate he loathes when people find out that I respond to as many DMs as I can see and I can find." And I make time. Like I will sit there and I would write out something or leave a long voice note, and I realized that this was something that people lacked and needed, and they needed, and having the distance of someone who was a near stranger but familiar enough that they felt that they could be vulnerable with, created like the right space for it. And I realized that coaching in itself was that balance where you knew you could walk away and not pull all these things into your everyday life, but you had your own space to do it. And then like not quite what a therapist would do in terms of like long-term healing, mental health work, the whole nine, but somewhere in between where you could set a specific goal and it could tie to anything, right? Like I love when I get the opportunity to support someone in their parenting journey or their self reparenting journey. Um, but also like sometimes it's just, sometimes it's a 20-year-old young adult who just wants someone with like an array of professional experiences like I did. I worked finance undergrad, master's in human services, commercial banking, risk and analytics, fintech, um, media and social media experience. Like I've seen a lot of corners of the corporate and professional and even entrepreneurship world. Um, and I can speak intelligently to a lot of these things and also like help a person build their toolkit to navigate their own journey. Because a lot of stuff, I like giving the space while like also creating a like fair compensation structure to do this work.
No, I like that. You mentioned self reparenting, right? And I wanted to know what that is and what that means. Obviously,
Oh
I
gosh.
love your brand of like
Mhm.
raising self because
Yeah.
I definitely feel like I've had to re-raise myself
Hmm.
in the past 4 years
Yeah.
of motherhood.
Hmm.
So how did that come about? What does that look like?
Oh yeah, totally. Um, so like I think with the onset of very candid conversations about mental health and social media online, actually this is a niche that I'm actively writing about. So I'm really passionate about it. We started to talk about our mental health journeys, our parenting journeys, and then parenting styles. A lot of these things are just terms and words that we create. You know what I mean, to label certain things, but reparenting specifically is that process of learning and unlearning, healing and reconciling, and meeting as an adult unmet needs experienced as a child, right? A lot of people, whether they realize it or not, are off have gone through some degree of reparenting. And so with my coaching is to create like a very intentional space to do that. You can start doing that to some extent within a therapeutic setting, within um, with a relationship with a therapist and a psychologist. But for me, what I like to do is come up with everyday strategies, add insights to things that people are going through. Reparenting is something that benefits not only your parenting, but it benefits you as like a worker, a spouse. Like I remember some of my earliest reparenting I had to start doing when I was in my first serious relationship. And a lot of toxic things modeled for me was just happening in my own relationship, and I realized I didn't have the toolkit to address conflict, and I had to establish a toolkit to address conflict. But I also had to understand some of the root causes of the way I address conflict, and a lot of those causes were in what I was socialized into at home, what I saw between my parents. And so, like, when you go into a reparenting journey, it's looking at the places that you would maybe have been on autopilot, that you haven't like really taken a critical look at, taking a critical look at it, and equipping yourself to make improvements in that space.
For the parents or the moms that you work with, how often do they first start working with you in terms of saying, "Oh, I just want to be a better parent. I want to be, a better someone who's more intentional," till the point where they realize, "Oh, I need to go back and dig back into where where did all of these come from, or the ways that I'm parenting, where did it come from?"
Yeah, I think it happens pretty quickly for me because I take a trauma informed approach. And so you have to look back to look present and to look forward. And so using that language really, really early on and bringing in those like thought leadership into their lives, it may be being the first time that someone brought that thought leadership into their lives, other than someone talking about it on social media versus someone speaking to it specifically within their situation. So people really quickly said, and I often say, hey, not a therapist, and depending on the structure, like I just added like a long term walk with you for a quarter, like 3 months, regular check-ins. But if I do a clarity call, that's a really quick call where we talk about one thing and we speak to it versus like a coaching, which is multi-session with like support in between and texting in between. That gives a little bit more reflective room. But even in like one conversation, I always give people space to like give me their elevator pitch of their story, right? Like one of the things I think is a superpower everyone should it can establish in themselves is think about your story and tell your story. That's something that my husband and I readily did when people would come and have those like sessions on our couch where they would talk. I would often start with, this is our story. Like, this is our falling in love story. This is a little bit of our background. Like, my husband, African American, many generations back, deep South, Southern Baptist. Me, first generation American, Caribbean parents, multicultural background in South Florida. Um, we would often start a conversation. You come, you have dinner, because so much breaking bread is I think, a very important part of connecting with people. And then we tell our story, and then that people be like, oh wow, like oftentimes people are uncomfortable with these things or they hide these things, and so we often start with those things. And so I try to start with, tell me about you. Who are you? And for me to know you, what are some of the most important things about you that you think I should know? And giving people space to tell their story. I think that's also why social media is so popular, is people are telling their stories for people who are interested and want to listen. And so, like, because they've never experienced that in real life. And so we do that, right? I did that for years on my couch, and I do that in even the briefest of coaching calls. Tell me who you are. Like, share a bit about yourself, and I'll share a bit about myself if you're interested. Um, and hold space for your journey as we talk about where you want to go and where you are right now.
Um, are there? Let me just go back to my question here. I I wonder, going back to intentional parenting,
Mhm.
what would you say is how much of it is second nature and how much needs to be taught?
It actually all depends on a person's experience, their own journeys, and their own traumas. Some people have been in fight or flight for so long that they've never had the opportunity to just sit and reflect, and some people have had lots of time to sit and reflect. So like, if you're coming to me to coaching after you've had a really good relationship with a therapist or psychologist, it looks a little different because you started doing that work, you're kind of aware. But if you're coming to me especially if you're doing a quick clarity call, like I need to make a decision really quickly and I could benefit from having a partner in this, someone bringing a variety of thought leadership with it. It can require a little bit more, right? Because coaching, especially my coaching, is deeply customized. It varies. It varies so much. I think the most important step is to understand what coaching is and to make sure you're selecting it for you and you're ready to go on that journey. Because I've had a lot of folks that have started and then just kind of didn't finish. Well, not a lot of folks. I had a handful. I have some folks where we said, hey, let's pause. Let's pause for like 3 weeks. Give yourself some time and let's come back, right? Again, I'm customizing this. So like, there's no like, for some people this would not work well, but I'm like what my superpower is flexibility. And so I'll read the person and I'll be like, okay, this, they need more this than this. They need less this and more this. Learning intentionality. A lot of people need to learn it. We could all benefit from more intentionality. As intentional as I am, there's times where I go on autopilot. It's my stress response. And I have to be like, oh, I need to be self aware and see my behavioral patterns and work on it. I have a spouse that we're all in each other's business all the time. And so he'll often be like, Sam, you're just on autopilot. You need to be, and I'll be like, oh crap, I am. When I don't catch it, I think in most instances catch it, or I've developed a relationship with my kids where they can say, hey mom, you've been, I'm like, oh wow, thank you for checking me. I needed someone to like say that because there's so much going on and there's so many variables, there's so much data that's coming into you and you're processing. It's often, you're constantly reprioritizing your life. So intentionality is also a privilege. You know what I mean? Like when you're facing conflict, when you're facing um, great change or catastrophe or loss, there might be just less space for you to be intentional. And so I've had people that was coming off a really difficult season. Maybe it was a divorce. Maybe it was transitioning from having a parent to not having a parent because of loss. And they were on autopilot and they're trying to get back to that, right? I understand the privilege of being able to have the space again, the emotional, the the temporal, the spiritual space to be intentional. So I also don't judge people who haven't been very intentional as far as they see it and are trying to really learn something that doesn't feel as natural to them.
I love that you said it's a privilege because that makes me, and I agree with what you said because sometimes when we are stressed, like stress
Yeah.
is a response, we don't know how to respond in stress.
Mm-hmm.
And I can definitely attest that there are times when I am like very, very much intentional with not overreacting when my
Mm-hmm.
kids do things. And then there are times where like
Mm-hmm.
trying to meet a deadline
Yeah.
and everything, everything is just piling up. And I'm
Yeah.
like, absolutely not. I do not
Not the
want to
best version
help
of
you
yourself. Yeah.
open a
Yeah.
snack in this moment. And so like the fact that that I don't think I've ever heard anyone say like it is a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And so thank you for saying that. That makes me feel better at the times when
No.
I'm not the
Yeah.
most intentional person.
Yeah. I think that people don't know how to extend themselves grace while being honest about their situation and their growth opportunities. Like you can say, I've not done this well, and still say, but I still, I'm still deserving of space, of peace, of kindness, of joy, right? That's how we get from being like where we are and where we want to be. Like balancing being very, very honest about where we are and what we haven't so much liked about our before or our right now. And then being like, but I can then move past this. That like that I think that's the at the crux of intentional living, of growth, of healing.
I want to go to your motherhood journey and then your
Mhm.
career journey.
Mhm.
How did you find a medium or a happy balance between the two?
Motherhood and career. I will say that I had a lot of support. After my husband did a lot of his own healing. Um, by the time our daughter had come, he went through like an incredible amount of loss and difficulty for himself, and he grew. We both went through like a rocky growth period. And I had the benefit of because I ended up like we moved back in with my parents, right? I had this full career, and it ended up moving me from where I was at university to out of state to back at one of their local offices closer to my parents to start. So I was living with my parents. My dad was coming back and forth from the Caribbean, and when my daughter was born, my sister, who's kind of just like younger sister, middle sister, not had no idea, probably still kind of like flipping about what she wanted to do with her life. And I had like this kind of demanding corporate career that I was really just starting, but had really strong income potential, had really strong, lots of things potential. And she became my nanny. But interestingly enough, because we were both living with my parents and the whole nine, but interestingly enough, my husband had gotten laid off, and my sister had a health scare. And so my husband then switched to being the primary caretaker. So I had 12 weeks of maternity leave, went back to work when the baby um, was 3 months old. My sister was the caretaker for maybe the first 3 months. Then she had a health scare and couldn't be a caretaker anymore. My husband got laid off. We had grew a lot in our relationship and healed a lot, and he became the primary caretaker for our daughter from like 5 to 6 months until she was about a year old. And then my sister's health was back on track. And so my sister had stayed with us, lived with us. So we eventually moved out of my parents' home. Um, we moved from to another part of the state, and then we moved to the other part of the country. And my sister stayed on for she had free housing and free food, and a room, and balanced the fact that my sister lived with us and was like on demand childcare during the day, but also my husband's was for years held the most flexible career. So that anytime there was anything like taking kids to the doctor, my sister didn't do a lot of the other things. So it was like a balance. My husband always took the kids to the doctor, or like I would say 75% of the time, he took the kids to the doctor. Um, he was always the one that tried to make it to any like extra activities. I did a lot of like the planning, but my career was always like the most competitive and the highest paying. And so we were both comfortable with but also the least flexible. So we were always comfortable with me understanding that, like, yeah, it's less flexible. I have to be in office. I have to go through these team meetings. I have to do all these things. I had these projects that sometimes meant that the hours might be long. And so a lot of that was just like a team effort. Having a partner that was that we had a conversation. He was really comfortable, and there's a number of times that I pivoted my career, my husband pivoted my career. I was like, after we had our second child, our two oldest are 18 months apart. I wanted to work on this startup idea. I quit my job and worked on it. My husband was like the primary income, and we had to scale back so much, and it was just like such a rocky financial time during that season of transition. Um, because we had more kids, the whole nine. My sister still continued to live with us. And we all just cut back. We all just bootstrapped it. Um, but like we were just a unit. And it wasn't until my kids were like elementary school age that she eventually moved out and, pursued other career options. But a lot of it was sometimes I was working a lot, Um, I finally, in the older years, really found a better balance, thankfully. I actually had to deal with my own career idolatry and my own um, deriving my value, my worth from how successful I was in the corporate world. So a lot of my journey also involved decentering like corporate career identity. Um, and so like that balance of in the space to even do that was because like me and my partner was on the same page. My sister was there as support and it was mutually beneficial. She got to live in cool places, move across the country, um, and do all these things within like the safety net of having your loved one with you. And I know that everyone doesn't have that opportunity, but also like has informed my idea of the importance of community and communalness. I think some of that we lost in the last, I want to say, two generations, right? Like people don't have like multifamily existences, they don't have generational existences. And I was doing something that like is not uncommon, that is actually was the norm and not the exception. And so a lot of my career growth was born off of also being flexible about what childcare and what family and community looks like.
No, I think that the way you were able to incorporate your family into it is definitely helpful, and thank God for your sister. Thank
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
God for your sister who was willing to do
yeah,
that.
yeah.
um, I don't want to respect your time. So I want to start to like kind of wrap up, but I would say, what sacrifices did you make with motherhood or your career for both exist? What sacrifices do you see other women making?
Motherhood and career are a series of difficult decisions. Um, I don't necessarily know if I even view some of the things that I did as sacrifices. They probably were. Um, Oftentimes, when the decision wasn't forced, like would I've gone back to work at 3 months? Probably not, but that was my maternity leave, right? Thankfully, with my third baby, the policy was 6 months. It was 6 months and then another 6 months working remotely. So that was a dream comparatively. Paid maternity leave for 6 months is incredible. Um, I think what some people might view as sacrifice, like in the early years time, the ability just to be there with my kids was a big sacrifice. I do think it's all a haze dream, but I think like we did what we had to do, and I also think the brunt of it didn't feel as harsh because I had in-home childcare. So I was leaving them at home and coming to them at home. And then when they started, kindergarten in the first grade, my sister was dropping them off and picking them up. So she had more time. Like she wasn't full-time childcare, she was part-time childcare, but she then had more hours in a day. But we'd go in the morning and some days we'd pick them up, we'd leave early, we'd go to school events, but we'd make it work, right? Time is always the biggest sacrifice. There's always an opportunity cost component to these things. If you're doing something, you're not doing something else. If you're doing something else, that other thing you're not doing. But I feel like I think in hindsight and in having peace with some of my past decisions, um, the changes that I made, the ones that were my choice, was less a sacrifice and more of a reprioritizing, right? Like for a long time, my number one was my career. Like I, wanted to be the C-suite to something. And at some point I was like, I'd like to help lead, but I don't want it at any cost. So making good decisions, figuring it out, repivoting, looking at work differently, those were born of my own shift in my relationship with work. And so it wasn't like, oh, I'm giving up this career. I decided that, oh, that'd be nice, but not at any cost. And I think a part of that also helped me. For longest, I wanted to go to an MBA program. And when I wanted to get my MBA, I was very set on an Ivy. So I was in like a pre MBA mentorship program and fellowship program, and I was visiting the top MBA programs in the United States. So I went to Yale, I went to Dartmouth, I went to Harvard for on campus visits and sat in classes, Duke, Cornell. And some conversations that I had with women, women of color, women of color who were professors, women of color who were matriculating at these places, women of color who finished their programs there, helped informed what I wanted. I remember this really connected um, uh, professor had noted that her close friend was at the C suite of a Fortune 50 company. And she said when she got her most recent position, they found her housing, found her husband a new job, furnished her home. Um, and the nature of that was she would not have time to do any of those things. And so she was like, you have a lot of really awesome, cool things, but there's a trade off, right? You move somewhere, and the day one, you're strategizing for this company to make them even more millions and billions at this point. Um, but you have to you're the thing, right? You're the commodity, and that might mean that you don't have time for the little things in your home. And I also kind of wanted to be involved in the little things in my home. And she was she was very matter of fact. She was like, that is the trade off. You know what I mean? When you're entering mid, high, six, seven figures, this is what it looks like. And I was like, I mean, for me, I remember when she told me this, I was like, I had two small children because when I decided to get MBA, I already had two kids. They were toddlers. I said, what I mean? I was like, it's so cool to be in a room with this caliber of women, but also like, yeah, like, is that number one? Like, what is the in between of that? Like, what is the balance between the two? And I started to really be, I went from being on autopilot with my career to being intentional about my career. And shopping MBA programs really helped me with that because you were having very, really great conversations with people, but you're also preparing for your application process. You're writing these essays, you're pitching yourself to admissions officers in a sense. And that was a really good exercise for me. I've kept so many connections and friends from that experience as well. Incredible people who are incredibly successful. Um, and even if I, in the end, decided, I had became really half-hearted in my pursuit of an MBA, and then I just finished the process and got waitlisted at some great schools and didn't pursue getting off the waitlist aggressively because I had decided I was like, I have a finance undergrad. I already had another master's degree. I'd started a master's program. Um, I hate to admit this, on maternity leave with my daughter. Um, and so it was just another degree. It was like my immigrant oldest daughter autopilot. And I had to make a decision. I had stepped back. It was a hard one because it was one where I had to be real with myself. I was like, why was I doing this? Where does this go? Does this really relate to my professional interpersonal goals for myself? And so that might have seemed like a sacrifice to some or a trade off, but no, that was like a me being real with myself instead of being on autopilot, put adding $120,000 worth of debt, and the whole nine to do this. So what sacrifices I make? A lot that some for some people would count a lot. For me, they were just pivots. They were redirects. They were ways in which I figured out how to navigate and thrive in a changing world and society. Remember, I'm a millennial, so I've gone through the Great Recession. I've gone through a lot of things. So I've had to make hard decisions, right? And they even now they feel less like sacrifices and more like opportunities, redirects, hard choices that I made for my own social emotional health. Because at the end, um, the thing that I have that is most important to me is like my mental health, um, children that I feel deeply connected with, and a spouse who I really enjoy rocking with. And the opportunity to do other things, right? No matter if if one door closed, I brought with me skill sets, knowledge, tools to like go into something else. And so like I hate the word sacrifice. I think often it is a really good word, especially if you're doing it from a place of really deep pain, harm, lack, struggle. So many things happened and they felt hard, and in hindsight, they felt right.
Well, thank you so much, Samantha, for joining us. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for appearing on my podcast. I really appreciate your time. Obviously, can you just mention where people can find you? I know one of them, but where are other places and how people can connect with you?
I'm Samantha Broxton, and you can find me all around the web, mostly under the handle at Raising Self. Raising Self on Threads, Raising Self on Blue Sky, Raising Self on Twitter, on Instagram, raisingself.com. That's my little piece of property on the internet. And on raisingself.com, you can find my contact sheet and you can find a lot of information about my services. But if you just want to say hi, go ahead and reply or slip into my DMs. I still sometimes find the time to reply. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.